Well, hey there, folks. Welcome back to another episode of the East to West Hunts podcast. Today, I got a really special guest, and I am stoked about this one. We're meeting with Justin Webb. He's the executive director of the Foundation for Wildlife Management. And I really feel jazzed up about this one because this is a controversial topic, but a lot of education to it as well. So, Justin, thanks for coming on, man. Really appreciate it.
I really appreciate the opportunity, Alex. It's always a blessing getting to come on a podcast that has some reach. So I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no, it's this is very cool, and yeah, I think it's such a good topic. I feel like there's something about wolves going on every day in the social media or whatever the case is. So this is going to be a good one, and I think a lot of education too, because a lot of controversy aside, I think people just don't know enough about it. I certainly feel like I don't, so I think I'm going to learn a lot from you in this episode. So it should be great. But with that said, I guess, for everybody that doesn't know you, can you give us a little bit about your background in wildlife management and kind of what got you here?
Sure, you bet. So I guess first I'll just kind of take everybody right back to the beginning. I grew up off the grid. It was about a mile to the nearest dirt road, I think. And a lot of people, they have this impression that somehow I hate wolves on account of the fact that I promote wolf harvest and management. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Growing up with that background and history, being directly linked to nature from a very young age, I think established a lot of my thought processes going into, what I now know to be management. I was taught really young to leave things better than we found it. When you go into a campsite area, you clean up the mess. You take the garbage out with you. Everywhere that you go, you try to leave it better for the next person. And that was just something I learned from a very young age growing up. You get into junior high and they start asking you questions about what you want to do for a career. And being a wildlife biologist was always at the top of my list. Of course, next to being a pro bull rider, that was the first thing. But those
It's
dreams,
awesome.
those dreams die hard. So I pursued that to some degree. I ended up going on to be a residential building contractor, but living here in North Idaho the majority of my life, I've just always had a huge passion for the backcountry and being in places that most people aren't willing to hike. And so being a backcountry hunter, when wolves, I don't know, the concept of having wolves on the landscape really came up as a topic, it was of huge interest to me. I always had a fascination with wolves. um, my dreams of being a biologist kind of got thwarted by life in general. But I did go to work for the Idaho Fish and Game Department as a wildlife tech back in the early
Okay.
2000s. Had some experience there. Was blessed to do some really fun projects there. I got to go with the grizzly bear trapping crew and trap grizzly bears in the Selkirk wilderness there, or not wilderness, but in the Selkirk backcountry.
Hmm.
And I've just always been really passionate about being a part of the solution. There's so much griping that takes place on social media, as you're well aware. And
Yeah.
the other part of that is that sportsmen as a whole, we just struggle to get on the same page a lot of the times. And so, always wanted to be involved. I volunteered extensively for the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. I was the chapter chair for the Mule Deer Foundation. I founded a organization called the Idaho Big Game Foundation. That was after I was struggling to get funding created for some wildlife projects that were local to home here. We've got an area up north of San Juan, Idaho, here where I live, where it's a wildlife corridor and they have to cross two sets of train tracks and the highway in the middle of winter time. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, the moose and the elk just get annihilated in that section of ground. And I really wanted to see an overpass built. So just sharing a little bit of my background and history and
Yeah, it's awesome.
volunteer basis for wildlife. I've always been passionate about it, and just there's nothing that I enjoy more than being in the backcountry and getting to watch wildlife and teach other people about it.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. Really, really cool upbringing there. What would you say was kind of like what shaped your view for wolf management in itself?
You know, when people were talking about bringing wolves in, there were a lot of folks around me that were upset about it, and I was excited. I was celebrating it. Honestly, I thought it was going to be the coolest thing since sliced bread. I wanted to hear wolves howl in the backcountry. the very first time I actually heard a wolf howl was a long time after I started recognizing impacts of wolves, though. And seeing the change that happened when our wolf population really exploded was what really drew me in and got me more involved there. There's one time in particular, I was going up Caribou Creek and come across a moose in the road that was dead. It had, the anus and the innards were chewed out of the backside of it, and that was all. There was nothing else wrong with it, but there's wolf tracks all around it. Obviously, there were bite marks like in the armpits and up
Hmm.
against the hocks and stuff. I got out and took pictures and was trying to understand what had happened there, and I still hadn't made up my mind. Well, I went another couple miles up the drainage, and here's another one. Same thing. I got out, took pictures, looked at all the wolf tracks everywhere. Same similar pattern. I got up, went through another switchback, and I got up on the hill, and I looked down over the bank, and there's another one. And I ended up finding 6
Dang.
dead moose in one drainage all in one day, and they had all died the night before, and not a single one of those moose was ever fed on. And it was just such a shocker to me because everything I had ever been taught about wolves growing up, learning from National Geographic
The
was
best source.
certainly not aligning with what I was seeing in front of me, right? And so trying to understand that, I just really dove in head first. Like I wanted to understand what was happening and why. I couldn't understand it. And people ask me sometimes, well, why do you waste your time talking to these folks who, bash and belittle you or insult you on social media and things? And my response is always the same. They're standing up for what they believe in. And
Hmm.
like them, as a kid, I grew up learning from National Geographic, and all of the things that they learned a wolf was, I had the very same opinion before I had wolves in overabundance in my own backyard.
Sure. I think that's very fair, and yeah, it's kind of like it goes back to obviously Colorado and the vote, right, for wolves, and you hear it all the time, right? It's like, all right, well, the city folks are making decisions for the people out in the on the ranches and stuff like that. I'm sure that kind of is a parallel to what you're talking about, right? Because you're not living with them now, you are, and maybe you have a different opinion all of a sudden because you're seeing what's happening. So pretty yeah, pretty cool statement there. I guess I feel like wolves are probably one of the most controversial animals right now when it comes to North America, whether that's hunting or just in general. But why do you think they spark such a huge reaction from people?
Honestly, I think it's because of National Geographic.
Yeah. Okay.
A combination of the human characteristics that National Geographic portrayed onto wolves as a means of being able to sell videos, right? I mean, they're in the money making business just like every
Sure.
other business. And that was the tool that resonated. When you portray human characteristics onto any species and you put it out there as if it's fact, people soak that up, and I was very guilty of that myself. I thought that only mommy and daddy breed, and they only kill the sick and weak, and they're good for the ecosystem because they keep the herd strong. Well, the very first wolf interaction I ever had, I was actually working for the Fish and Game Department, and the feds showed up at our wildlife management area asking if we had seen this wolf come across our wildlife management area, in the days prior. When they found that wolf, she'd been collared in Troy, Montana, or up the Yak, I guess, actually, over in Montana. And she had just taken down a mature 6 point bull all by herself on the ridge right above the WMA that I was working in. And
Wow.
again, that's where all these questions came up, like what was wrong with that elk? How did a single wolf take down a mature bull elk by herself without even having much snow on the ground?
Yeah.
It went against everything that I had been taught a wolf was, and that's when reality really started to sink in that, you know what? These are amazing animals, but man, they are deadly. They are such a just an adept predator, far more than what people realize.
Oh yeah. I'm always shocked at just how big they are too. Like you have no frame of reference till you see them relative to like the size of a human, and you're like, that's a big canine. So that's no joke.
They really are large in appearance. I'll say this, there's a huge misconception out there that all these wolves that people are seeing on social media weigh 200 pounds. It's something we have that conversation so often that it just makes me giggle every time I hear it. But I can tell you that I weigh most of my wolves, and the heaviest wolf I've ever caught was only 119 pounds. That being
Okay.
said, the biggest wolf I ever caught, I would have put $100 bill on it that he weighed at least 150, and he was only 106. So,
Okay.
they're tall and lanky. They stand tall like a deer. I think a lot of people, when they first see their first wolf in the backcountry, especially if you're glassing, the first thought that comes to mind is a deer because they're extremely high off the ground. I mean, that their head sits above where a human's waist would be, and so if
Mm.
picture that standing up, they're just real tall. They don't weigh much, but they're very tall.
Yeah, you're spot on. If you would have asked me what I would guess, I would have probably told you in between 100 and like 15 to 150 pounds. So,
Mhm.
so, and again, I've never shot a wolf, so I can't speak to it. It's just based off of images and sizes that I've seen. Like I've had buddies shoot them, or they've gotten taxidermy done, and I'm shocked at the size of them. And I see the full body mount. So that's really good information there. I guess that kind of jumps into like you hear management after any kind of animal, right? But when you say like wolf management, what do you wish the average person understood the right way about that viewpoint or that statement?
In regards to wolf management, I think that the biggest thing that people misunderstand, both the hunting public and the non-hunting public, is that, if you take it back to just basic biology, every living animal has to have a set amount of food, water, shelter, and space to be able to thrive, right? And that's what scientists or biologists call suitable habitat. Well, people look at things, critters like bears and lions, and they look at the population stats that we have of each of those animals within a given area, and they have some false expectation that wolves should also be in those numbers, but they don't understand that wolves themselves and wolf biology and mentality doesn't allow for that. So whereas you might have, extremely dense bear or lion population in a given area, our average pack territory in Idaho is about 250 square miles, and
Mm,
we have an average pack size of 6, each having a litter of 7. 30% of those packs are having more than one litter because more than one female gets bred. But by the end of the year, they're back down to an average pack of 6, right? Sometimes even 5.
so what happens to them?
Well, they fight over territory constantly, and they have a very high mortality rate.
Mm,
So, yes, wolves can live to, 12, 13 years old. There's been a lot of wolves that are documented that are, well over 10. Most wolves, they say the average lifespan is 7 in a population that's not being hunted. In our population, I would venture to bet that the majority of those probably don't even live to that age. But wolf dynamics, because they're so territorial, they're running 250 square mile home range. And if another wolf comes into that territory, they're most likely going to be killed or ran off. And so it's not like you can put the same number of wolves in a given square miles section of ground that you can with bears or mountain lions. Those species certainly are more nomadic and they live on their own, but they tolerate each other a whole lot more than what wolves do. Wolves actually patrol their territory boundaries to keep other wolves out. And if other
mm,
wolves enter, they're constantly fighting over territory. So the question being, what do I wish that people understood? I wish that people understood that you can only put so many wolves in a given area, and it's not a very high number. When the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service stated that we should only have 500 wolves in the state of Idaho, that was based on how much suitable habitat, food, water, shelter, and space that we have available for wolves. And they laid it out very plainly that if we had 1,500 or more in the whole NRM DPS, that's all of Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, the eastern half or third of Oregon and Washington, a section of Utah. They stated if we had 1,500 in that entire area, that would deplete their own prey base and cause chronic livestock depredation. We housed 1,500 wolves in the state of Idaho for 5 or 6 years
mm.
before we finally obtained enough aggressive management tools to start dropping that number a little bit.
Well, okay. So you saying that? Okay, so you get 1,500 now in the state of state of Idaho. Like what happens when the wolf populations get to that point and they're not managed, right? Because that sounds like a high number when you're saying now you're going to go 15 in a pack and then they go back down to 6. Like that's a lot of turnover essentially if you think about it.
You bet. That's one of the questions that I often ask people, especially when I'm going to a new area and giving talks about our Foundation for Lake Management program, is where do you think all those wolves went? Right? So with wolves, different than some species of predator, rather than just simply dying from disease and starvation, which is what happens typically when a predator population gets to that point, with wolves, their propensity to travel is just incredible. They've actually got collar data of wolves traveling more than 4,500 miles before they set up camp somewhere and claim the home range. And I just out of curiosity, I was on Google Earth one day playing around. 4,500 miles is the distance from the North Pole to the south end of Guatemala. So it's hard to wrap your head around those kind of travel patterns, right? But so what happens is those wolves disperse. That's people. I hear people talk about, oh well, the wolves that were transplanted to Oregon, or the wolves that were transplanted to Washington, the wolves that were transplanted to California. Those wolves migrated there. That's just basic wolf biology.
Yeah.
When a wolf is coming into the 2-year age class mark, and we're going into breeding season like we are right now, there's a ton of turmoil in every wolf pack. They say that 12.5% of any wolf population are lone wolves that are dispersing. So that's why we have wolves all the way to the Washington coast, all the way to the Oregon coast, deep into California. Two wolves that I know of have been shot in Texas.
Okay. That's
People
interesting.
people say that that's, a lot of people they have a lot of different opinions on that, but I've done a ton of research on it. Wolves just travel a great deal. So not only do they expand their territory, but they also have a huge detrimental impact on the wildlife populations within a given area. One misconception is from the hunting community standpoint, the hunters are all ranting and raving saying they've wiped out our elk, right? I mean, the if you look at the
That's all
actual
you hear.
yeah, constantly. If you look at the actual maps of the state of Idaho of what's no longer meeting elk objectives or has suffered chronic livestock depredation, it is the vast majority of our state in a huge way. One of the things I think a lot of people misinterpret or misunderstand, displacement is a big part of that. So, whereas I grew up hunting the backcountry, and where elk hunting to me is, hiking your guts out early in the morning in the dark and sitting down on a ridge and watching the sun come up with elk bugling around you at the
Hmm.
basin somewhere, that's my favorite place in the world. And that's what elk hunting is to me. Elk hunting to somebody else might be going and sitting in a tree stand in Farmer Joe's field and arrowing an elk that comes out there to feed on the alfalfa or whatever it happens to be. A lot of our elk have been displaced, and it's not just elk that get displaced, but my biggest complaint as a hunter, as a passionate backcountry hunter, I don't want to go shoot an elk out of Farmer Joe's field. I want to work for it. I want to climb the
Yeah.
mountain. I want to be where elk were the entire time that I was growing up. And the non-consumptive hunting or non-consumptive public oftentimes will respond to that and say, well, it's not about you. You don't always get what you
Sure.
want, that kind of thing. But that's why I'm so passionate about it. But as to answer the question of what happens, you end up with additional pressure on mountain lions. A lion that used to kill a deer a week now has to kill 4 or 5 times before he gets a meal because the wolves learn to run him off of it. I don't know how many times I've seen pictures of and documented bears being dug out of their dens. The conflict that happens amongst those large predators is vast, and that equates to a lot of things like mountain lions moving into housing developments where they're now killing cats and dogs, and people don't understand what's happening or why. You have elk that are displaced. Our caribou are completely extirpated from Idaho. The last caribou was darted and trapped and taken to Canada to try to save the bloodline. Um,
Mm.
a lot of people don't realize that our moose population in some areas, those moose will winter in the really high elevation ridge lines covered in ceanothus brush. Well, they wallow a path through the snow as it stacks up, eating that ceanothus brush, and they hydrate from the snow itself. When the wolves drop in on them, those wolves can run right on top of 6 or 8 feet of snow. The moose can only go where they've already packed a trail, and
Yeah.
there's ducks, and so they just get wiped out in huge swaths. Wolf overabundance is a severe problem.
Well, okay. It's really interesting. That's a lot of information there. So I really appreciate that. When I think of wolf management, the first thing that comes to my mind is trapping, right? So, and I don't know if that's right or not, but um, you know, I think that often gets misunderstood in that capacity as well. Like, where do you feel trapping fits into the modern day aspect of management for wolves?
I had never trapped anything prior to recognizing that we needed to solve our wolf problem. Arrogantly, when we got our wolf season, I thought that as a passionate backcountry hunter, because I'm successful at killing elk, I'm going to go kill wolves, right? And we're going to solve our problem. That was the mentality of a lot of us here in North Idaho. We didn't realize how hard wolves are to hunt and how far they travel and how hard it is to get inside of shooting distance of wolf. So learning more about that, that's kind of how the Foundation for Wildlife Management got started, but we can touch on that later. Trapping is a huge part of wolf management. And the reason is because people have this misconception that somehow back in the day, wolves were hunted and trapped to extinction. And that's something that just cracks me up every time I hear that. If wolves were hunted and trapped to extinction, there would be none, is the term that they're looking for when they're having that conversation. But that's not the case. Back in the day, everybody either hated wolves or they feared them so badly, every wolf was shot on sight by every person. On top of that, they had full-time employed people, federal, state, and local, out targeting wolves on a regular basis. And they still couldn't learn, they couldn't figure out how to control the reproduction rate. They couldn't figure out how to control their numbers, so they poisoned them. That's what
Mm,
happened. Well, with hunter success rate being less than 1% in today's day and age in Idaho and Montana, trapping is the only mechanism that we have outside of poison that will actually potentially control their population. Unfortunately, trapping has such a bad rap because of all the rhetoric, out there. Um, it comes under a lot of heat and it's heavily, heavily restricted. What people don't understand is that trappers are using the exact same tools that the biologists use every year to capture, collar, release, and study the very same animals. There's all this rhetoric about traps ripping animals' legs off, and it's barbaric and
yeah.
hated, and it's all these things. People forget that trapping is what built this nation. People forget that if a fur trapper was to damage a pelt when he caught the animal, that fur wouldn't be worth near as much.
Hmm. Sure.
There's no trapper that wants to see damage on a caught animal. The wolves that we have here, the majority of those were trapped, put in a box, brought down here, and turned loose. If trapping was anything like what the public thinks it is, biologists could never do that.
Hmm. So that's a fair way of putting it. Where do you see responsible wolf trapping in 2026? Like, what does that look like?
Oh gosh. There's a lot that goes into the whole trapping conversation. Well, I'll preface with this.
Okay.
Across our nation right now, the hunting and fishing community is shrinking every year, by leaps and bounds. We have become, as a society, so disconnected from nature that we're losing sight of where our food actually comes from. We're losing that connection. Trapping this last year, while everything else was shrinking, grew by 230%.
Nice. That's great. Okay.
So to ask the question, where does modern trapping or ethical trapping stand, or what role does it play in 2026? It's huge. And ironically, the part that shocked me the most about the growth is that, when I was asked the question, Jason Wisniewski from the Fur Takers America was visiting with me about this, and he asked, where do you think that the majority of that growth comes from? What segment of people? And I'm racking my brain. I'm thinking, it's got to have something to do with wolves because everybody wants a wolf, and there's so many people that are now trapping them. And he said, nope. He said it's soccer moms. And I,
And what
I
are they trapping?
I was kind of shocked by that. And he said, well, you got to think about it. There's all these young kids that are in 4-H and they all have chickens and rabbits and goats and sheep and all these different animals. The one thing that's not really being addressed everywhere because it's so confrontational is predator problems. And
Hmm.
so when Susie Q, soccer mom, or whomever ends up with raccoons or skunks or fox or coyotes in the chicken pen, they want to be able to solve their own problems. People are wanting to reconnect with nature. They're wanting to get back into being self-resilient, and it's a growing sport rapidly. So I'm excited to hear those numbers and to just share that, they may claim, they being the non-consumptive community as they call themselves, that trapping is outdated, but I'm here to tell you it's fastly picking up pace.
That's great. I laugh at the soccer moms thing because in the summer we had some holes dug around our like deck and the whole deal. So my wife, we have traps, right? So my wife decides to put one out, and I go grab my laptop the next day, and I go out on the deck and I'm working. not paying any attention to the trap. I go go look over there and I got a skunk. So now I'm like, oh my God, like what am I gonna do with this thing, right? So, anyways, take care of that whole deal. Then, like the next week, we go put up a trap up again because there's this groundhog and he's digging up all whatever. It's literally same deal. I go out on the deck, I go work, I look over there about an hour later, there's another skunk, and I'm like,
Yeah,
"You're like the
yeah,
skunk trapping expert, whatever you're doing." So it's really funny,
that's incredible. Skunks are not fun to deal with. From my perspective, there's actually a lot of money in skunks right now as far as trapping
right?
skunks. But yeah, there really is. There's a lot of guys that are out targeting them. You know, that's the thing is they're a very renewable resource, and there's value in that. So kudos for to your wife and to yourself for becoming skunk trappers. Skunks are a ferocious predator. People don't think about that a lot, but they are huge nest raiders. You know, get into like the duck hunting community, any waterfowl, turkeys, upland game birds and stuff, skunks can be a tremendous issue for.
Attention hunters, are you sick and tired of the complicated draw systems and tag applications that take place out west? Or maybe you want to plan a western hunt or maybe one of your dream hunts and you don't really even know where to start. Well, that's where East to West Hunts comes in. We take care of everything for you. We'll do the tag applications. We just need to put a strategy in play for you of what you're trying to do and when you're trying to go. Whether it's short term, mid-term, or long term, we want to have that play and that strategy together. And when you do draw a tag, we can look at do-it-yourself options such as hunt plans that detail out exactly how to hunt those areas, or we can get you booked with a guide and outfitter in that specific unit or area. So don't leave that hunt to chance. Give us a call, set up a time on the website, contact us on social media, whatever it is, and let's get planning towards that dream hunt of yours. And let's make it a reality. Check us out on www.east2westhunts.com. Again, that is www.east2westhunts.com. Also check us out on Instagram, YouTube, and podcast. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.
Ground nesters.
Well, we see them here and there, kind of a deal, but clearly there's a lot more going on at night that we're not seeing. So, to have a couple in the same spot, 4 or 5 days apart it says something, at least to me. So, but anyways, I want to take away from that. I feel like, the wolves are the topic here. So, as far as like, I've never trapped wolves, right? Or I really have never trapped much. I've tried to do a couple for like coyotes and then just some live traps here and there. But what does the high level view look like as far as like the process for actually trapping a wolf?
The very first and foremost thing for trapping wolves, from my perspective, is a person has to grasp the concept of how far they travel and how long it takes them to return.
Okay.
That's, in most states, there's typically check time restrictions. So here in the state of Idaho, we have to check every trap every 72 hours. Well, 2 years ago, in the 4 packs of wolves that I actively have been trapping for a number of years, I run a lot of trail cameras, and monitoring and studying their movements is a big part of what helps me be successful. It was a 64-day average pass through for every location that I set traps for
Wow.
each pack of wolves. So that being said, that means that I only had one chance every 64 days, 2 months, to be able to have a wolf even in an area where I could potentially trap them, right? So convincing a wolf to step on something that's the size of a silver dollar in their territory, given their senses, is an extreme challenge. And it's one that I
Yeah, no
encourage
kidding.
everybody to try to challenge themselves with. But you have to be realistic about your expectations and knowing and understanding that the amount of time allotted for every successful wolf removal via trapping is atrocious. I mean, you really become married to that trap once it's in the ground, and a lot of that again is due to the restrictions that are placed on trapping on account of a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding. There's this thought that if an animal is in a trap more than a day, that somehow it's going to be suffering and all these different things. Um, that's a whole different conversation. For
Okay.
somebody to go out and trap a wolf, it's going to be a huge time investment. It's going to be a financial investment because you have to get set up. And if you're going to do it, you need to do it right with the right gear. And that's one big mistake I see people make, is not buying the right traps when they get out there. And they just need to be aware of the fact that odds are your first season, you're likely not going to catch anything. It's going to be a lot of learning and studying wolves, and hopefully learning from other people if you have an open mind. But if you stick with it, it is very rewarding when you're successful. Wolves are the greatest adversary I have ever had in the field. And I've been really blessed in my hunting career. Whitetails, mule deer, bear, pronghorn, whatever. If I set my mind to it, I've been successful at obtaining what is a trophy caliber species of each species in my mind for our own home ground. I still, to this day, I swear every single wolf that I harvest is the greatest outdoor accomplishment I've ever had.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I mean, when you put it in the perspective of, it takes 2 months for them to even come back through, and you got this little tiny touch on the surface of the earth for them to come into. I think it really kind of puts the perspective in a little bit of a different viewpoint on just how difficult it is. So I think there's a big point of appreciation to what that takes. You talking about the gear, like I'm just thinking about any hunter that I work with, gear is such a big focal point for everybody, but you got to have the right gear for every situation. Otherwise, it does make it significantly more difficult. So, that's huge. When you think about like the knowledge, like what knowledge or skills do you think somebody develops in that first year that makes them a much more like responsible or successful wolf trapper in the future?
Honestly, I would say being willing to observe. There's so much of wolf trapping that is just simply making time to be in the field and making observations. The first few years, I was actually guiding elk hunters for a number of years, and I was in this particular section of ground, and so every wolf track that I saw, I marked it on my GPS. Every wolf turd that I picked up or saw on the road, I marked it. That's going to sound weird, picking up turds. We can get into
Hey,
that later, but that's all part of it.
all
So
to you, man.
all the wolf signs that I saw got documented. And pretty soon I was actually able to start putting together travel corridors where, what parts of a given territory wolves were actually using. So I would say, in the first year, I would have an expectation that that's going to be a super fun project. And you're going to, no matter how much a guy thinks that he knows about the landscape and thinks that he knows about his quarry, wolves are a different critter, and you'll have a whole different appreciation for learning the species that you're targeting if you go and start pursuing wolves to any degree that's going to be successful. I'll say that.
Okay. Not to go too far back, but on the topic, I just had this thought. So you mentioned that they're moving around, right? Significant amounts, right? So their pass through is whatever you said, 64 days. When you're thinking about the packs and the size of the packs, right? Let's say they go from 6 to 12 to whatever the case is. That pack has their home base, but like how long are they actually in that home base before they're moving? Like, is there a time scenario to that, or are they just kind of constantly moving within that 250-mile radius as their home base? Like, am I thinking about that wrong, or is that kind of correct?
No, I'd say that it is correct to some degree. There's certain times of year that wolves use a different area within their own home territory, though, right? So
Is that food based?
from my perspective, it's not so much. In
Okay,
some areas, it very much is. So in areas where, especially, you get into Canada and Alaska, they're dealing with different temperature ranges than what we have here in North Idaho. So our wolves here typically are not, they're very rarely hungry. And I'll delve into that just for a little bit. I don't want to get way down a rabbit hole here, but
okay,
when our elk and deer migrate for the winter, they don't travel 50, 60, 100, 300 miles to get to their winter range. They drop an elevation from 5,000 feet to 3,000 feet, and they do that in
sure.
one day. That's their entire migration. So even the elk that travel out of the backcountry and move out over like Lake Pend Oreille, as an example, when they winter out there, those wolves in their 250 square mile home range have favorite spots that they like to be, where people don't bother them, where they have everything that they need, et cetera, et cetera. At any given time, they can, come out of the Coeur d'Alene River, climb up over the ridge, drop down into the next basin, climb over the next ridge at 5,000 feet, drop all the way out over the lake, kill and eat, and be right back where they started before it's daylight.
Hmm.
So in
That
our
makes sense.
area, our wolves don't travel necessarily according to food source. I hear guys talking, especially folks who've never harvested a wolf on social media. That's the name of the game. They advertise it. Well, if you find the elk, you're going to find the wolves. From my perspective, that's not how it works. There may be areas where that certainly does play a huge role, but from North Idaho standpoint, I don't see that at all. What does dictate movement, however, is the age class of pups within the litters of the pack. So right now they're going into breeding season, and right now it's chaos out there. You got wolves traveling every different direction. Wolf packs are busting up and blowing up. There's wolves that are dispersing. There's lone wolves that are searching for females. Those wolves are bumping into packs, and there's fights happening between the mature male that's in the pack and the lone wolf male that's showing interest. And so it's kind of turmoil out there. By March, at least the end of March, those females are looking for denning areas, right? So if they have a den site location picked out or some general vicinity, they're going to be a whole lot more concentrated around that given spot. And from the time that the female whelps until those pups are big enough to travel with the pack, late July, they're
Okay.
going to be somewhat anchored to one of two places, either the den site location or their rendezvous site that's somewhere close to the den site location. So yeah, the pack is still traveling, the pack is still defending the territory, but they somewhat have to stay less mobile because they've got to keep the female and the pups fed. So that's one
Mm.
time slot. By the time those pups have moved to one, possibly two, maybe even three different rendezvous site locations. Rendezvous sites are areas where the pups are held typically, until they are big enough to travel with the pack, and also where wolves consistently meet back up after, big extravagant forays, whatever. About I'm going to say the end of August, going into September, around that time frame, those pups are big enough to now travel with the pack. And when we say pups, we're talking like 60 to 70 pound wolves at that point. They're,
Okay.
people say the word pup, people are picturing a puppy, and that's simply not the
Yeah.
case. By the time you get into July, those pups at a distance, it's hard to tell them from the adults. So then from then all the way through the breeding cycle, they're running the whole gamut of their entire territory, except with the caveat that if you have a huge hunting pressure amount within their territory, they're going to delve into the deepest, darkest holes, where they're not being bothered, that they can find most of the time if the pack has been pressured. Every pack is different. That's one thing that I always tell everybody. There's no hard rules because the wolf that's leading the pack changes the dynamics of the pack based on its own personality, and every pack has its own personality. So one hard rule for one pack is never going to be the same for the next. That's something that I've learned the hard way over time. But from my perspective and opinion, it's the breeding cycle, it's the pups and the den site location. Yes, certainly prey base is going to play a role, right? They've got to have their,
Sure.
super habitat needs. But I think those other factors are much more important to focus on.
Okay. That was great. That definitely answered my question there. Well, cool. All right. So I got one more for you here in relation to the just trapping. You mentioned like somebody's realistic expectations being like the first year they might not be successful, right? And I think a lot goes into it, especially if you're just learning. But like, I guess what does success look like for somebody, year 2, year 3, year 4? Like, what could somebody expect if they were consistent and they were actually like, they're marking the territories, they're learning along the way. I mean, is it one wolf a year? Like, what does that look like?
For me personally, I would encourage everybody that, in your first year, if you learn wolves crossing points and you have them patterned for a given pack, that's a successful year, whether you catch anything or not. That's a big part of becoming a wolf trapper. By your second or third year, hopefully you're going to be successful. That's the only thing that's going to keep you motivated enough to keep you going. That's
Hmm.
my experience watching people. Um, but some of the best in in the Northwest who trap wolves are only going to catch 5 wolves in a season.
Okay.
It's very rare that somebody catches more than that. In fact, one person caught 20 wolves one year. It's only ever been done once. We do have a handful of guys who, after really dedicating some time and energy to it, they're picking up 10 a year. And that's outside the norm. Those are
Sure.
guys that are seriously putting a lot of energy and time and money into what they're doing, scouting all year. People get this impression like elk hunting. for example, we might go work out in other times of the year. We might take some time to put our pack together, but then you're going elk hunting, right? And you're
Yep.
there for a week's time. Wolf trapping does not work like that. If you do that wolf trapping, your odds of success are slim to none. It does happen, but it's still very, very slim. Wolf trapping is a year-long commitment of studying each pack so that you can be successful during season.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, you really got to commit to it. From at least from what it sounds like you really got to be committed to it.
To be successful, I would say that's very much true. And even though I've trapped a fair number of wolves, but if I catch one wolf in a season, that was a productive year. That's 20 elk a year saved for an average lifespan of 7 years. That everybody always asks me, well, what does that
Pretty
wolf weigh?
awesome.
What does that wolf weigh? That wolf weighs 140 elk. That's what that wolf weighs, and that's what's
Insane.
important to me.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, on a balance perspective, for sure. Tell me a little bit more about the Foundation for Wildlife Management. Like what's the mission there? Who's that for? I'm sure it's something that a lot of folks, audience wise, somebody watching or listening to the podcast, they might have never heard of it. Like, what is it?
You bet. So the Foundation for Wildlife Management is a grassroots effort to try to control wolf overabundance as a means of maintaining healthy wildlife abundance for us and the next generation to have to enjoy. When we started seeing huge detrimental impacts to our elk and moose populations right here at home back in 2008, 2009, there were a lot of conversations coming about at that time of what can you do to help? Like, how can we solve this problem? Trying to talk to the Fish and Game Department about those things. When we got our season, we, as I said, we arrogantly thought we were going to go solve our problem, right? I'm the man and I'm going to go fix this. Well, it became apparent that wolves are much harder to target than other species. And everybody told us from our reaching out to Alaska and Canada that you have to trap them. And that's the only means that's going to really, have an impact. So, not knowing anything about that, the group of guys got together and called up the only trapper that they knew. They bought him lunch and they sat him down. They said, "We need you to teach us how to trap wolves." And he said, "I don't trap wolves." And they said, "Well, but what do you mean? You're the only one we know that knows how to do this. You're obligated. You have to do this." And he said, "No." He said, "I'm obligated to feed my family. I've got to keep the lights on at home." He said, "This is going to cost you so much money, you won't be able to do it." We didn't know what he was talking about at the time, right? We'd never trapped anything, didn't know anything about it. And from that, the conversation kind of arose as well. One guy said, "Well, I spent $3,500 chasing wolves this year instead of hunting elk. I should have paid you to go remove some wolves where I hunt elk so that I'd still have elk to hunt. And so my family would have a place to go elk hunting." And that initiated this whole concept of, for $500 a wolf, the guy was willing to try. And so we started gathering people to donate money to this kitty to try to help fund wolf removal where they were causing so much problems. And that in itself, we got our 501c3 status in 2012. We now have 11 chapters, 5 in Idaho, 6 in Montana, each of which has a fundraising banquet every year. We've actually got 10 banquets coming up between January 17th and the middle of May to help generate funding.
Okay.
So the program basically works like this. As a non-hunting member, as a non-wolf targeting member, I'll say, your $40 a year membership is what is keeping the handful of guys, the very small number of people who have the ways, means, tools, and knowledge to get out and target wolves. It's keeping those guys in the field doing so. We use those dollars to reimburse them for their expenses for every wolf they harvest. So while you and I are sitting on our couch playing with our kids or watching football with our buddies on Thanksgiving, somebody is married to a trap line out there in a blizzard trying to get the job done so that we still have elk and mule deer and moose and other wildlife to enjoy. As a non-wolf targeting member, your membership it gives you a way to be a part of the solution. You get on any elk hunting community page, any hunting community page in Idaho or Montana, you're going to hear people whining about the impact of wolves, right?
Yeah.
Gives
Yeah,
you
for
a
sure.
way to do something productive to be a part of the solution. This gives you a way to help and do more than just complain about the problem. So as a guy that's out targeting wolves, or if you're a hunter that happens to have a wolf tag in your pocket and your membership, when you harvest a wolf, you send in a copy of your wolf harvest registration form for the state of Montana or your big game mortality report for the state of Idaho. and a copy of your expense receipts, we cut you a check, you keep the wolf. We don't ever see it. We've done that over, well, almost
Wow.
2,900 times now since our founding, which has
It's
saved
awesome.
over, if you add it all up, that's saved over 400,000 big game since we started. And so, again, F4WM is a grassroots effort of the hunting community trying to leave something for the next generation to enjoy.
It's awesome. Yeah, that's a damn good mission right there. I like it. When you said go back, right? You were talking about the receipts of stuff. What exactly is that? Is like you're talking about the tag and what else? Like what's entailed into that?
You bet. So anything that assists you to get in the woods to target wolves is reimbursable. It doesn't have to be a current year expense. If you bought a rifle 5 years ago and you're using that rifle to target wolves, you can submit that as an expense receipt. So right now we're currently funding $1,000 statewide in the majority of Montana, $1,500 in regions 1 and 2 of Montana, $1,500 on a statewide level in Idaho, and then $2,000 per wolf in all the units that are not meeting elk objectives or have suffered chronic livestock depredation for the last number of
Mm,
years. So we're talking about
got it.
a pretty good chunk of change, right? So if you're on the East Coast and you're a predator hunter or whomever, and you want to come target wolves, you buy your license, you buy your tag, you come out here, you save your receipts for your travel. We're not going to reimburse your food. We're not going to reimburse your alcohol, anything like that. But
Sure.
your travel expenses, your Airbnb stay, your pickup truck, if that's what you're using, can be reimbursed. So everybody asks me that question, what can and what can't. I just kind of give them a rundown: hats, boots, gloves, guns, ammo, optics, your backpack, your four-wheeler, whatever it happens to be. If you're using it to target wolves, we'll reimburse that expense. Again, this is not a bounty. It's a reimbursement of your expenses up to the max allowed per wolf within each unit. The system has worked tremendously well. There's a lot of guys that are now taking 10 wolves a year who have reinvested their reimbursement checks into tools to help them be more successful. When we talk about the expense of targeting wolves, I'll just give you one example. You guys can crunch the numbers yourself, but I'm personally running 130 to 150 wolf traps. The average expense for each of those traps by the time I get it set up is about $85 a piece.
Okay. So let's do that. What did you say? 130 to 150?
Yep,
So 130 times what was it? 85?
yep.
Okay, so that's $12,750.
Just in wolf traps. That does not account for all of the prep work, all of the additional tools and equipment, all of the wax sand that I go through every year. I mean, the expense
You
is,
got to travel,
yeah,
right?
I mean,
Gas, all that.
honestly, fuel is the number one receipt that we receive. I
Okay.
run about an 80-mile trap line on my snow machine. So by the time I load up my machine, if the expense of the machine, the expense of my vehicle, by the time I load up my machine and I drive to where I'm going, it's an hour in fuel in my truck, towing a trailer. I get on my machine and I run 80 miles every day. Most sleds get very poor fuel economy. Um, I'm very blessed in that I chose to upgrade my sled. Now I'm running a 4-stroke machine, gets a little better gas mileage, but the gas bill at the end of the year is atrocious. It really is.
Sure.
People don't understand. The first time I crunched all the numbers, I was embarrassed. I gave this speech at one of our banquets and I told everybody, I said, don't tell my wife, but I just added it up. At that point, I was into every wolf, about $1,600 for every wolf that I'd caught. And talking to most guys who are out targeting wolves, they average between $2,000 and $2,500 in expense for every wolf they take.
It's a lot. Yeah, that's a really unique way of doing the model, but it makes sense because it's not possible without a lot of people being able to do it. So
It
that's
helps
that's
keep
pretty cool.
the few guys that are successful and know what they're doing. It helps keep the right tools in their hands to continue their efforts and to help maintain. And again, we're talking about a wolf population that's almost 3 times what we have suitable habitat to house. So sometimes I get that question, well, why are you even doing this? It doesn't make any sense. Well, it's because our wolf population is extremely overabundant. What you're hearing in the media, what you're hearing from the non-consumptive public, what you're hearing from the Yellowstone tour groups that are funding all of those videos of all this
Yeah.
rhetoric about how wolves saved Yellowstone, all of that hogwash, it doesn't come into play here. We're dealing with a severe overabundance of a predator that's having negative impacts on our landscape.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head there, and you answered a couple of other questions I had just in the last perspective because I'm constantly thinking about stuff. I'm curious, but yeah, pretty powerful. You're really good. You're really good selling it, though. I gotta tell you, man, because like I'm already thinking about I gotta get me a membership because I know I got Rocky Mountain Out Foundation, I got Ducks Unlimited, all these other things. But after we get on this call, you'll see my membership come through because that's pretty sweet.
I appreciate that, Alex. I tell you, I'm not a salesman. Marketing is not my thing, but I will say this, and I believe this from the bottom of my heart. We are the one organization that is actively doing something about the wolf problem that's productive. It's
Yeah.
there's a lot of battles that need fought. There's a lot of battles in, whether it's through game commissions, legislation, whatever it happens to be, politics, educating the public. We do a whole lot of those things as well. We travel around the country, spend a lot of money going and educating people on the wolf issue, how the dynamics of wolf overabundance impacts other species and, certain areas. But in my heart, I can tell you honestly that this is the most important program going right now for wildlife nonprofits. I honestly believe that. And I am a life member of more than 20 organizations that I've, firmly believe in. I don't think there's another more productive program going right now in the US.
Yeah, well, listen, I can tell you're very passionate about it, but I think it hits home because you got data, you got a lot of information there, and it just makes sense, right? So it's awesome. Shout out to you for that. I did see, and this was, part of how we got in touch was I saw you've created education towards trapping. So like, what was your problem statement there? Like, what did you see that you would needed to try to solve to create something to help people learn how to trap wolves?
As the executive director for the foundation, I get phone calls literally daily from people asking how they can be part of the solution. People sign up, they want to be a member. I think yesterday's call was from, I don't know if it was Minnesota somewhere, and they want to come here and they want to help, right? They
Hmm.
recognize the problem. They're seeing the message that we're putting out there, but they don't even know where to start. As a volunteer, so having gone into this entire topic with zero interest and zero knowledge about trapping, I have since become not only I got on the board of directors for the Idaho Trappers Association. We recruited the president of the Idaho Trappers Association to be on our board of directors so we'd have a better link and understanding and a partner working group. I have over the years become more and more involved in education surrounding trapping. I am now serving as the Northwest Regional Director for the National Trappers Association. I
Okay.
started gathering the efforts of the most productive members in the Foundation for Wildlife Management and having them come together to give demonstrations and seminars on what they were doing to help them be successful. And over a number of years of holding those events and going to different trapping organizational events, whether that's fur sales and conventions, and watching wolf trapping demonstrations and seminars being put on, over time, I started putting those on myself. The problem with that is wolf landscape is so much different, and trying to understand how to successfully trap a wolf in wolf landscape is hard to teach when you're sitting in a flat field at a fairgrounds building, right? You can explain things, but you can't show them. So the other aspect of that is typically those seminars are only an hour long. Well, it takes you 10 minutes to really get into it. And the closing 10 minutes is trying to get wrapped up so the next guy can get started. So you got 40 minutes to try to teach somebody something that's taken me 15 years, 20 years of studying wolves intently in such a short amount of time. So, when Taylor hit me up to do this master class the first time, I didn't honestly have that much interest. I didn't think it was something that I could pull off productively. And then over about a year's time, I kind of let it soak in. The more instructors of wolf seminars that I spoke with, the more people started to ask me for something similar. Guys were asking me if they could pay me to come run their trap line with them. They were asking me if they could pay me to come on my trap line so they could see firsthand exactly what the sets looked like when I got done, so that they could learn, a lot more about it. So finally, I just decided, you know what, if we can pull this off and do it for an expense that doesn't break the bank and it creates more education, we certainly want to do that. And so there is a fee for the Wolf Trapper Masterclass, but it's minimal. And we're trying to keep it that way because I want these people to have the knowledge and the tools and the ways and means. I want them to be successful. So in this class, I've just taken my video camera, something I'm not very apt at. It's interesting to me trying to film myself doing things in the field, but it's actually come together really, really solidly, and I'm really proud of it. I've got a lot of positive feedback. A lot of guys saying they can't wait for more content. The course is already, I don't know, it's got to be pushing 11 hours long,
Okay.
just video segment. And then on top of that, I'm going back through each course and writing up anything that I missed in the video. But the goal there is we need guys that know what they're doing. The more people go out and target wolves without knowing what they're doing, they're educating those wolves faster than the guys that know how to catch them can catch them. And
Hmm.
so an educated wolf pack, people don't understand when you educate one wolf, the entire pack keys into that wolf's energy. So when it comes into a meadow where it's had issues before, or it's run into a wolf trap before and it gets skittish and its tail tucks and its posture changes and it goes to the other side of the meadow, the entire pack adopts that behavior. And
Mm,
so as
it's
time has gone
interesting.
on, that's the very first thing I did. I went up there and educated every wolf that I had in my whole area, making them so much harder to trap. If we can help educate our people who want to be a part of the solution, who want to consistently harvest wolves and get them on the landscape with the knowledge that it took me 15 years to obtain, more power to them. It's just creating our army, and hopefully it's going to get us back to meeting our wolf management objectives in all the states.
I mean, it seems like there's a lot of education needed to it, right? Like I would have no idea where to start, right? So I need to have some kind of resource to start with it. And like I just think right now I'm actually building out for tag applications and hunt planning. I've kind of built an annual cadence, right? Like an actual structured process from January to December, and you kind of like it will literally coach and follow through the entire thing. Now I work side by side with people all the time, but there's nothing that organizes stuff in that same cadence. And if I'm thinking, or with your perspective, you got to have the organized structure to learn something. Otherwise, you're just patching a bunch of crap together, and you're going to be chasing your tail in a lot of that stuff. And at least that's what I found with my clients. I can only imagine trying to take an endeavor like this that take years to figure out for one wolf. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you're talking about. So going into this, again, I'll repeat this. I kind of had a pompous, arrogant attitude about it. I really thought that I was going to go solve this wolf problem, and the reality was, wolves are the most difficult animal I have ever pursued. And every time a wolf learns something from a hunter or a trapper, they become that much harder to capture or to harvest, and does the entire pack. If it's a pack of 10 wolves and you educate one of the old wolves in that pack, that entire pack just got harder to harvest,
Yeah.
across the board. So when I started out, I went into it kind of hot-headed, thinking that I was gonna, that I had it figured out because I'm a successful hunter, and I couldn't have been farther from the truth. I was completely dumbfounded at my experience. I'm hoping to save other people who want to do this from that learning curve. It's a huge learning curve, much larger than any other species I've ever targeted. And if we can help get the knowledge in the hands of those who are willing to do the work, we got a whole lot better chance of actually maintaining a productive elk herd on the landscape for the next generation to get to enjoy. So that's my goal. One thing I will share is there's no course out there in relation to wolves that's going to give you every tool that you need, because wolves are constantly changing. They're dynamic. That's part of what is intriguing about wolves and what makes them so hard to harvest. And I think the reason why so many people want one is because they're hard to come by.
Oh yeah, yeah. You definitely feel it's a prize. That's for sure.
Yeah, if you go into this with the mindset of, well, I'm going to take one class and it's going to teach me everything I ever needed to know, you're likely going to fail, because that's not how it works. Wolves are something that transforms, and they learn from us constantly. So what I'm sharing in this course is every tool, every lesson that I've learned, all of the mistakes that I've made, hoping that we can alter that learning curve for others.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, like what are a few core topics or maybe a couple modules that you really love in that coursework that I guess you're most excited about?
I think there's a few different ones, but helping people understand the dynamics of wolf behavior
Okay.
and what they're looking for, the places, the pinch points, learning about how to target wolves using saddles and ridge lines, learning about, how to use your electronics, something that I'm sure you're extremely familiar with,
Oh yeah.
learning the starting points. I get that question almost daily is, I want to come help, but I have no idea where to start. And everybody's question typically goes back to, tell me where to go. And they really think that that is the key. They think that where to go is the solution to harvesting wolves. And it breaks my heart to have to explain to those guys. I get these phone calls from folks back east specifically, or down south, other areas. I shouldn't label one, any other
Yeah.
area. And they all say this, it's almost always the same typical conversation. I'm coming out there. I've got, I took all 7 days of my vacation for this trip, and I'm coming out there, and I was going to buy 5 tags, but I just wondered, do you think I should buy 10? Or is that going to be enough? I've got 7 days, and how many tags do I really need for 7 days? And I'm just dying inside, but it's hard to help them understand that if you get to see a wolf in 30 days of chasing
Yeah.
wolves, you've done something. I can tell you from, granted, I'm not the greatest wolf hunter in the world by any means, but I've only shot a couple of wolves in all of my time being in the field. I can only count 3 times that I have ever seen a wolf that was not in a trap. They're
I mean,
extremely.
I've never seen a wolf running around, so that I know they're very skittish, very wary. You're not going to see them, but they're there, right? Like they're around. They're not making themselves known unless it's nighttime, of course.
People make those comments. Well, we must not have very many wolves because we don't see them. My
Yeah.
first response is always this: how many flying squirrels do you see? How many mountain lions do you see? How many pine marten do you see? This is wildlife that lives in abundance all around us all the time that very few
Sure.
people ever lay eyes on. Wolves are no different. I correlate it to hunting mountain lions without hounds. It's very similar. They're very cagey and they don't like to be seen, except when something captures their curiosity. I mean, they have their own dynamics and everything. But back to the question of what part of this course am I excited to share? As I said, in all the demonstrations that I've done and watched, you cannot help somebody fully understand what a wolf set looks like, or what a wolf peep post looks like, or what a wolf rendezvous site looks like, or what a wolf crossing location looks like without getting to see it, right? And you can't teach that sitting at a fairgrounds building. You can't teach that in a classroom. You can't teach that online. The camera's going with me on my line where they're looking at these sets that I'm catching wolves at. And some of that video, I'm going to some of my most productive sets over time that have caught the most
Okay.
wolves for me, and showing them this is the pea post tree that they use. This is where they've made mistakes. This is where I've been successful. This is what it looks like. This is why I chose this spot. This is, the lure that I use, right down to every little detail, and sharing that information in a way that's, I think, never been shared before for most people, unless you have, are blessed to be invited to go on somebody's trap line with them, is going to be hugely valuable. And I'm sure it's proving to be already. We've got some guys that have taken the course that have steel on the ground right now. And, I'm communicating
awesome.
with them on a regular basis. And I'm just so excited to get to see some catch pictures when they connect.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to those. I'm sure you'll have them on social medias. That'll be sweet. Well, this is awesome. This was a great topic, and hell, I've learned a lot from you in just an hour here. But I guess my overarching question, right? Not everybody traps. Certainly, not everybody traps wolves. It's a very niche perspective. But like, what role do you feel as hunters, as sportsmen? Like, even for myself, right? If I'm not doing it, what do I play into the future of wildlife management in this perspective, and how can I help in the dynamic, even if I'm maybe not trapping? What can I do?
Get involved.
Okay.
That's the number one thing that I think, as sportsmen as a whole, that we're kind of missing the boat on. Those who don't want us in the field, those people who tout themselves as being non-consumptive, even though, they still drive cars, they still eat similar foods, they still have houses built from timber. Those people are organized and they're very well financed, and they have full-time teams of lawyers working on their side to find the tools that they need to try to stop trapping and sportsman lifestyles in general.
Mm-hmm.
If we
Yeah.
act and we show up and we let our voice be heard and we stand up in a professional way, not the hot-headed, arrogant, shoot, shovel, shut up, all of
Yeah.
that. tying a bloody deer to the top of your car, all the negative things that we do. We are our own worst enemy in so
Totally.
many ways. But if we do it right, we have the ability, we far surpass them in number drastically. I would venture to bet 100 times fold, but we have to show up. We have to come out of the woodwork. Those
Hmm.
people spend all online. Those people spend all day in the public eye. Those people go to every public meeting. I don't know how they do that or how they afford to, but they do. While the
Sure.
rest
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
at work, they're beating us. We got to show up and we got to do it in a positive way. We got to educate people. We got to, stop picking fights with the general public, invite their questions and be willing to answer, have the hard conversations about the importance of wolf management and do it in a way that doesn't offend them. You know, when I talk to our volunteers about going to talk to the Fish and Game Commission as an example, so many of them get so worked up because they want to see positive change. They don't know how that positive change is created, and they go in there beating on the table mad. And so the only way I can get, like, the best way, not the only way, the best way I've learned to give them an example that resonates with them is if you walked into a bar to have a conversation with a man sitting at the bar, would you walk up and punch him in the mouth right out of the gate? Or would you
Right.
walk and shake his hand and ask him to have a conversation? When we go at people who are on the fence, that, we've got 10% that are anti-hunting and we've got 20% that are diehard passionate hunters, and all of those people that are in the middle, that's our target audience. Those are the
Hmm.
people who don't really know what to think, and they're being pulled by the media every day to the anti-hunting theories and concepts.
Yep. It's
If we're
true.
willing to have that conversation with them in a productive way that invites them to come be a part of who we are, invites them to get to know us, doesn't get offended and punch them in the mouth every time they ask a question that they've heard about on social media, that's left leaning or anti-hunting leaning. We can be the future. We can leave everything we've been so blessed with in our lifetime for the next generation to get to enjoy. If we don't, they're going to take it away from us. They're going to
For sure.
change our lifestyle. So, the question of what role do we play? We are the goalkeeper. We are the key. We are the importance of everything that is dear to me in my lifestyle, in the outdoor lifestyle, the ranching community. We have all the tools. We have to be
Yeah.
willing to put it to work.
Yeah. We're our own solution, or we're our own problem. Essentially, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I know that's a really long-winded way of saying that, but that's what I'm trying to get across,
It's
guys.
good.
We gotta show
I
up. We
get it.
gotta we gotta get involved. You gotta go to your commission meetings. You gotta go to when in your state house, there's legislation that comes up in relation to hunting, trapping, fishing, whatever. We gotta show up and we have to be on the same team. We gotta stop bickering. If we can just set our differences aside and get on the same page and support each other for the things that we all have in common, we can create that positive change. We can leave this world to the next generation with everything that we've ever dreamed of it being. But we can't do that when we're constantly fighting each other and then picking fights with
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. I agree, man. Well, as folks are listening here, obviously, I think this is a great message. Learn a lot from you, but obviously, to continue on this for somebody that's listening, like maybe they want more information, maybe they want to learn more about the topic, but like, what would you recommend their next steps be as far as what should they do to learn more about, what you're doing? I guess your educational perspective too. Like, what are those areas to do?
My very first suggestion is join the Foundation for Wildlife Management. You can go to F, the number 4WM.org, 4WM.org. Click the join button. We send out a monthly newsletter and we started doing an annual publication. There's a lot of information in those, monthly that talk about who we are, what we're doing, what's successful, in the outdoor industry, what projects that we have going on, how a person can get more involved, even education on how to approach your commission in your state to be able to learn how to create positive change. When I went into this whole project, I was that guy that stood up and beat on the table because I didn't know how else to do it. I didn't know what the process was. And after attending every Fish and Game Commission meeting for 10 years, I've learned a ton about how that works and how change is actually created. And it's not from beating on the table, unfortunately. we're
Yeah.
all, but join the Foundation for Wildlife Management. If you want to learn how to be successful targeting wolves, strongly encourage you to take the Wolf Trappers Masterclass that I did with 360 Sportsman. You can find that on 360sportsman.org.
I'll add it. You can send me the link. I can add it to the show notes here.
Yeah. I will say this, if you're going to target wolves, whether it's hunting or trapping, there's a lot that can be learned from that course, even if you're not trapping wolves. I spend a lot of time talking about wolf behavior and wolf dynamics and the difficulties with targeting wolves. And it's not just for trappers. I'll throw that out there. If you're really interested in learning more about wolf hunting, I'd encourage you to take Tom Snyder's Wolf Hunting Masterclass that's on 360 as well.
That's a good ad. Yeah. I'm sure he's got a lot. He's in Idaho too, isn't he?
He is, ironically, we're kind of neighbors. He's not far north of me here.
You guys got to do a episode together talking about wolves. Would be great.
I don't want to spoil it, but people might be keep an eye out. We got some stuff in the works.
Oh, do you? Oh, that's cool. Okay. That's sweet. See, maybe I'm onto something. Well, cool, man. I appreciate the time today. This was very educational. I hope viewers and listeners got a lot out of this, and certainly check out the foundation side, check out the masterclass. I think there's a lot to learn here, and I think this is a topic to continually evolve. I'd be really curious how your trappers do out of your masterclass too. So I really kind of look forward to seeing the progress there. That'll be a really, really cool perspective. So anyways, I'm going to add my own shameless plug in here as well as far as the podcast, but it is prime time, folks, for tag applications. I don't know if you know this, but January is the kickoff, and we got lots of stuff going on right now. So if you have the opportunity or you need some help on it, please reach out. This is the time to really get started for the whole year. And I got a lot of stuff cooking, but first step, if you want to book a time and actually chat about something that you're interested in, go over to the website. That is east2westhunts.com. Literally click on the free consultation button and book a time. And I also have just released something called the Western Hunt Base Camp, which is a community that you can join for free. And it just gives you a ton of different resources to get involved in. And you have other hunters in the community we can build upon from there. So do yourself a favor, join that. And there's definitely some other opportunities within that to level up if you're looking to get group or one-on-one assistance within it. So I'm really passionate about it. I'm really excited. I've been working a ton on it. And I certainly want you to join. So give it a shot if you can. But with that said, any closing thoughts here, Justin, before we step away today?
I'm also on Instagram, Idaho Web, as well as on Facebook. I don't use my Instagram there as much as what I probably should. So if you reach out to me there and I'm a little tardy in getting back to you, that's the reason why. Facebook, I try to keep up with pretty regularly, though. And I'm regularly posting things on there that are educational, whether it's about how to be productive and successful at targeting wolves, or about the different things that are taking place in the world politically or legislatively, whatever it happens to be in relation to wolf management. So happy to have you follow us there as well. Foundation for Wildlife Management also has a Facebook page and Instagram. Similarly, we're on Facebook a little bit more than Instagram, but we'd love to have you guys follow us there. We also have a YouTube channel, which has a whole bunch of different videos on just our program, how it works. There's a lot of great information on there.
Sweet. Okay. Well, I'll add all of that in the show notes if you wouldn't mind sending me links to everything and make it easy for everybody to reach out. But anyways, it's been a pleasure, man. Really appreciate you coming on, and thanks for the time. And we'll have to reconnect here later in the season and see how everything's going.
You bet. Thank you so much, Alex. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks.